Hi friends, my name is Jake. Welcome to Canadian Cutting Edge, and we've got a full-sized fixed blade for you again today. This is by SixLeaf, a budget line from TwoSun Knives, budget company, sub-company. This is by Rattlesnake Design, the SL-08. What we've got is a very stabby tip on this knife, and we'll see it when we get to the tabletop. D2 steel blade and a chunky handle here, which is kind of unique. We've got a honeycomb shaped lattice in this resin made of aluminum. Also comes with black resin, and there's a third version of this with different kind of resin handle scales, more like the Raffer style, but it's glow in the dark and it's got this greenish glow color. That one you can only get from AliExpress. I got mine from White Mountain Knives, where you can save 10% with coupon code CCE every time you shop there, or at their store for automatic knives. That's whitemountainauto-knives.com. So without any further ado, let's get to the tabletop and do this. Here it is. You want to take a look at that first. There you go. You can see that honeycomb kind of shape. I know this is highly polished, so there's a big glare from the light above. And when you look at the spine, you can see at some spots the aluminum is either right at or just behind the edge. And of course, the same thing happens on the belly of the handle. But, you know, very cool effect. Very cool indeed. Let's look at the size comparison. I'll flip that over. The Ontario Rat 1 is a commonly known knife. A lot of people know about it. So let's line up those pivot pins. Obviously, we've got a longer handle on the SixLeaf, and we've got a longer blade on the SixLeaf. This is a full-size folder in every way you want to measure it. So let's put that aside. Oh, the other measurement, let's put it this way so you can see it's also a thicker knife. That handle is chunkier by a fair margin. We're going to go over all the exact specs. I measure everything in-house with some high quality measuring tools. So I'll let you know exactly all the dimensions of everything that you see here. For now, let's focus on this blade. It's D2 steel. Rattlesnake Design. You've got this cool milled out section up here. So it's not really a fuller. It almost looks like jimping on the side. And we've got some big blocky jimping on the spine right here. It's somewhat effective. It's not super effective, but you do get some extra grip out of that. We've got a really high flat grind, and we've got a back swept plunge, just like we've got the handle coming a back sweep on the handle right here. So there's no forward choil on it, but you could modify it into that quite easily if you wanted to, just grind that out a little bit. It's not terribly thick behind the grind. It's quite thin in most of it. It gets a little thick closer to the tip, or thicker than the rest of it. This is a very slicey knife. It cuts quite well. I really like the way they made this blade. Like I said, D2 steel, they've done a gray wash finish on it, so probably a titanium coating on it, a light gray titanium coating, and then a stone wash, and that's how it looks. The badging on it, there's your rattlesnake for Rattlesnake Design, SL-08 D2 on the main bevel. Now, granted, you can't really put it up here on the flat because you've got all that decorative milling over there, and at least it's not super huge. And on this side right here, we've got the SixLeaf circle with the 6 little leaves coming off their circle. Badging, okay. I wouldn't mind, if the lettering here was a little bit smaller, because you could read the rattlesnake, so you should be able to read the rest of it if it was a little smaller too, but it's sort of okay. Now, we keep full thickness of this blade until right about there, and then we've got the taper coming down. That makes for a strong tip, and, pretty good for puncturing into things. You've got a big guard right here, and, with the flipper coming out and the jimping on there, lots of protection if you are going to use it for puncturing into things. So you can definitely use it that way. There's a slight chamfer, I forgot to mention that, on the side all the way along until, you get the taper towards the tip. The sharpener's choil, as usual, the sharpener's choil isn't big enough to finish at the end of the plunge. The plunge area here, that's the transition between the ricasso and the main bevel. It's a slow, gradual plunge, and it ends, right about there. And so the ricasso's ending before that, which means this area, it's easy to get that to be messed up when you sharpen it. The narrowness of the grind bevel here, edge bevel, it changes in that area because the steel's suddenly getting thicker than it was for all the rest. So I don't really like the sharpener's choil, or they could have made it with a quicker plunge. That's the blade. The pivot here, well, we've got a flathead screw here, which means it probably has a D-shaped pivot pin. T8 screw here, and the other body screws are all T8s as well. They're button screws on the pocket clip, which we've seen from them and from TwoSun for a long time already. Pocket clip is a bit big. It stands out further than most pocket clips do, but functionally it works. And these T8 screws all over the place, they're good, high quality screws. So that's that. The back spacer, we've got a long back spacer here. It ends at the corner of the end with a pin there. That's your lanyard pin, so no hole needed through the handle scales. I like lanyard pins. I don't use lanyards an awful lot, but I like this because then the paracord just comes straight out the back and it doesn't bunch up in your hand when you're holding it. So I'm happy with that. And then the back spacer comes almost to the end of the handle here. The handle scales are radiused. There's a bit of a curve to them, so it's thickest right down the middle, but not an awful lot. And then the edges are, softened up a little bit, but it's full. It's thick in the hand. Now, my hands are just barely in the extra large range, and it feels a little big in my hands. Now, when I did my testing, my extended testing with it, it did feel, a little too big, but somebody with huge hands is really going to like it. We've got a bit of a crown or a curve on the handle. It comes on the belly side as well. And then we've got a big cutout here for the lock release access, so you can easily get at that. Bit of a chamfer on the side, and it's easy to get in there and disengage that lock. So that's nicely done. And lock up, nicely done. Blade alignment when it's closed goes right down the middle, so that's a good thing. The flipper, it's got a flat front while it's on an angle, but we've got 4 little slots milled in there for some jipping. Light switch method works just fine. No problem at all. The detent on this is pretty good. It's a little bit softer than I'd like, but it's pretty good for the detent. Pulling it down from the side works as well. And, it always locks up solid. No blade play side to side, up and down. So that's quite good. And the balance point, there it is right there. It's where most knives are. I personally prefer the balance point to be a little closer to the pivot pin. I like it to be balanced right at the leading edge of my index finger. It just feels most free right there. So the balance isn't bad. There is some skeletonizing in there. We're going to see that in a little while. By the way, even the liners have a little bit of a chamfer on the edges. So, there's no hot spots per se on this knife, unless you get poked with the tip. Now that's going to be kind of hot. And of course, you want to see how well the pocket clip performs. It's just like it does in every TwoSun knife, at least with this pocket clip. Every budget TwoSun knife that has had this for quite a while. There you go. Full depth. Like I said before, there's lots of extra room there. You could have much thicker pocket linings here. It works just fine. That big scoop coming over the end here, that's longer than it really needs to be. On this knife, this pocket clip looks okay. Unfortunately, TwoSun and SixLeaf also use the same pocket clip on smaller knives, where sometimes it's a bit out of place. But like I said, here it looks great. That's pretty much it before we take this thing apart and show you how it's constructed, so stick around for that. One thing to note, if you're taking the knife apart on the working side and you have to take the pivot pin off on that side, so you may as well, you need to take the pocket clip off so you can access that back screw. First off, you can see these screws. These are some good quality screws. They really are high quality stainless steel. where you've got the pivot pin here with that D-shaped section, so it locks in with that D-shaped part right here. Ceramic detent ball and ceramic ball bearings, very well done. Skeletonizing all over that side, one big chunk out of this side, so that's good. And of course, this resin is very light indeed. We've got the big backspacer. Now, you have to use the backspacer because the pins here do not have shoulders on them. So that means you have to have them. Otherwise, if you tighten it up without the backspacer, then the pressure is going to be put on the resin here. Now, that might be okay. And of course, there's the blade. And we don't have a detent ramp that TwoSun knives have, but they do a little chamfer on the edge just to make it easier for that detent to slide over there when you go to close the knife. So yeah, fairly well constructed. The weight of this knife, 160 grams, 5.64 ounces. The sharpness from the factory, 125 bests, which is better than average. It's not exceptional, but it's better than average, so that's a good thing. The length of the cutting edge, 103.3 millimeters, 4.07 inches. Blade length, tip to the closest spot on that resin handle, 97.9 millimeters, 3.85 inches. The thickness of the blade at the thickest point here, 3.92 millimeters, that's 0.155 of an inch. So 155 thousandths, that's pretty good, well over an eighth of an inch. The blade depth is widest right at the heel of the blade, 33.5 millimeters, 1.32 inches. How thick is it behind the grind? The average of three measurements, 0.44 millimeters, 17 thousandths of an inch. Yeah, that's why it slices so well. I like 17 thou. You got a lot of times that you can sharpen this knife before it's going to get thick. So I really like that. To the grind angles. This side's got an average of 20.3 degrees. This side's got an average of 20 degrees on the sharpening. This side was sharpened the best. 20.5 degrees at the heel, 19.6 degrees at the tip. That's less than a degree of change along the length. This side started at 22.2 degrees, ends at 18.5 degrees. That's 3.7 degrees of change along the length. Not as well done, but the sharpening on this, the grind angles are better than average, better than most knives that I review by a fair margin, even though I'm saying 3.7 degrees of change. It's a pretty sad commentary on the industry, but that's how it is. I'd probably sharpen this to 18 degrees per side, unless I was going to use it, under hard use, maybe a bit like a chopper, pushing it into some really hard materials. I might do 20 degrees, but probably generally 18. That's that part. How about the handle now? The handle length, 131.5 millimeters. That's 5.18 inches. The grip area between my thumbs here, it's right around 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The handle thickness along the thickest spot on the resin, not counting screws or pocket clip or anything, 17.7 millimeters, 0.697. A little under 3/4 of an inch thick. Yeah, that's thick. That's thicker than I prefer. The handle depth. So where's the widest point in this grip? It is right here, but it's only slightly thicker this way than it is over here. So pretty much the same. 26.2 millimeters, 1.03 inches. When you close the knife, the widest point is at the flipper, 41.6 millimeters, 1.64 inches. And the total length of this knife, rounded to the nearest millimeter, is 229 millimeters, 9.01 inches. Yeah, 9 inches, a little over 5, a little under 4. The proportions are okay. It's good. I kind of like it. For the price, you get a pretty good knife. It's got, some unique look to it. Now, I'm sure you will have noticed, if you take the time to look at this carefully, this honeycomb pattern is far from perfect. Especially if you look right up here in this area, they're kind of stretched out, elongated. This is really thin aluminum, and I'm sure, it came out in a big honeycomb sheet, and it's so easy to have that stuff move around and flex. Even maybe under the heat of the resin curing, it might have flexed and stuff. So it's not a perfect honeycomb shape. If that's what you're expecting, that's not what you're going to get. Of course, you can get the green one with that sort of raffia look if you really want to. I like this nice bright red. It's kind of, attention catching. Now, how comfortable is this handle? It's great in the left hand. Now, my left hand feels very comfortable in here, partly because of this big cutaway here. So, this part of my finger is closer and it just wraps around there nicely. It's the opposite on this side because this is wider, and then the finger has to come back and in. It creates a pressure point right there on your index finger in the right hand. Now, it's not painful at all or anything. Maybe they could have, ground this down a little bit because of how thick it is, made that a softer shoulder, put a chamfer on it, a big chamfer, to make it more comfortable. That's my main con on this knife, is that point right there. And if you wouldn't have watched the whole video, you wouldn't have found out about that. So kudos to you for watching the whole video. So pretty good. Lockup's good. Detent's pretty good. Alignment's good. No blade play. The blade of the shape, very useful. Thin enough to be useful. Solid, decent pocket clip. Good hardware. Flipper's easy to use with that detent. Oh, one other thing, as is typical with TwoSun knives, the same thing is sometimes common on these SixLeaf knives. Without any thread locker, the pivot screws sometimes come loose during use. So you might want to use some Loctite or thread locker, or I prefer VC3 Threadmate by Vibratite. And yeah, there's that. Huge shout out to my financial supporters at Patreon and YouTube memberships. If you want to help out the channel, I would appreciate it very much. I do need your help. I end up selling almost every knife that I review because I need to be able to buy more knives, and I'll be doing a knife sale, and my supporters will get first dibs on that sale. And the sale should happen next week, around the 13th, I'm thinking, of September. So stay tuned for more information on that. Go to youtube.com/Canadian Cutting Edge/community, and I'll put more details there. And I might put details on my Instagram as well, at Canadian Cutting Edge. And of course, I'll post it on my Patreon page. Thanks for liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. And remember, friends, always cut towards your chum, not your thumb.